Tim Lake grows up on the coast in Cornwall, England, with his father James, his mother Mary, the forgetful uncle Desmond, and his free-spirited younger sister Catherine, nicknamed Kit Kat. The family religiously followed routines like tea on the beach, movie night on Fridays, and the dreaded New Year's Eve party, an event that never goes well for Tim. One morning, after a New Year's Eve party, Tim hears that his dad is looking for him and meets James, who tells him about a family secret passed down to him by his father after he just turned 21. He tells him that the men in their family can travel back through time to specific moments they have lived before. Although Tim doesn't believe what he is hearing, he is curious as to how the process works. James tells him that he would have to go to a dark place, clench his fist and think of the moment he wants to go back to. Eager to prove his father wrong, Tim goes to his wooden cabinet, clenches his fist and thinks exactly as his father told him. Tim opens the cabinet door and finds himself at the previous night's New Year's Eve party. Tim is shocked, but he goes downstairs and joins the party. At the end of the countdown, announcing the beginning of the new year, Tim kisses the girl next to him, whom he awkwardly gave a handshake previously. He goes back to the present and continues his conversation with James, who used this gift to read all the books he ever wished. Tim wants to use it to get rich, but James highly discourages him against it, mentioning that some of their relatives ended up miserable after abusing it. James advises him to use it for something important, so young Tim decides to get himself a girlfriend. That summer, Tim meets with Charlotte, a cousin of Kit Kat's boyfriend Jimmy. Tim falls for Charlotte immediately and plans to use the 2 months she is staying to find a way to speak to her. All of Tim's attempts, including giving a good back rub and impressing her in tennis, all failed and the 2 months were up. On the last day, Tim builds up the courage to speak to her and tells her, but she tells him that he should have told her earlier why she still had time. Tim uses his gift and goes back to the middle of the summer to tell her about his feelings. He used all the beautiful words he could think of to express his feelings, but she tells him to wait for the last day and see what happens until then. Heartbroken, Tim learns that it will never work out between them and all the time travel in the world could never make someone fall in love. The next day, Tim says goodbye to his family and leaves for London in search of a future and a girlfriend. In London, he stays with Harry, a playwright friend of James. Staying with Harry was not easy for Tim. He was a bitter, lonely man who didn't like anyone's company. Working was also not pleasant since he had to deal with rude co-workers who didn't appreciate others' hard work. 6 months passed as Tim lawyered day and night. Despite the countless girls passing him by, he always ended up with his co-worker, Rory. One night, Tim goes out with his friend, who takes him to a Domhnall Noir restaurant, a place where guests are served in total darkness. They end up sitting with 2 girls, one of whom is Mary. Tim and Mary hit it off and enjoyed the dinner. After 2 hours, they leave the restaurant and Tim sees the gorgeous Mary for the first time. After some strange greetings, Tim asks for her phone number and she gives it to him. Full of excitement and joy, Tim arrives home and finds Harry making a drink for himself after having a terrible evening. Harry tells him that his new opening night got ruined by the lead actor, who forgot his lines. Tim leaves the distraught Harry and goes upstairs to use his gifts. He goes back in time and helps the actor remember his line. Although the play was successfully concluded and he appeared together with Harry at the after-party, Tim couldn't find Mary's number in his phone. So he goes back to the restaurant, but he can't find anything about them and he returns with a sad face. The next morning, Harry, who was bragging about himself, gives him an article to show him the part about the play, but Tim ends up seeing an advertisement for Kate Moss's event. Tim recalls Mary's obsession with Kate Moss from the other night and attends her exhibition until he meets Mary. Tim approaches Mary and continues the conversation from their night at the restaurant, but Mary, who never met Tim, feels confused and leaves to meet her friend Joanna. With Kit Kat encouraging him to try his luck one more time, he uses Kate Moss to relate with Mary and ends up having lunch with them. At dinner, Tim finds out that Mary has a boyfriend, Rupert, who arrives at the scene. Tim gets jealous and asks a bunch of questions to find out when exactly Mary met Rupert. After finding out the exact time and place Mary met her boyfriend, Tim excuses himself and travels back and turns up early before Rupert arrives. Tim arrives at a party and finds Mary on the balcony. He boldly asks her to leave the party, telling her she finds it boring, and she leaves with him after Tim uses her own words to describe Kate Moss. Tim and Mary have dinner along with an interesting conversation, where they talk about each other. Tim walks her to her car and they end up kissing. Mary invited him in and waited for him in the bedroom. They make love, but Tim didn't think it was good enough. So he uses his gift and repeats it until both end up lying on the floor satisfied. Over the next few days, Tim and Mary's relationship develops and they move in together. Then Mary suddenly informs him about her parents' arrival for lunch. He panics because she didn't mention she has a boyfriend but tried to look presentable. Mary tried her best to mention some do's and don'ts, but her parents were already at the doorstep. Tim's conversation with Mary's conservative parents didn't go as planned, with the nervous Mary doing all the talking, but they get through it. At night, Tim asks her to go with him to the National Theater, but she tells him to take someone else, stating she would rather stay in bed. After attending the theater with Rory, Tim sees Charlotte from afar and describes her as his first love to his co-worker. Later, Tim approaches her and she gives him a warm welcome. He says all the wrong things as if he was back in that summer, but he corrects it using his gift. Right when he is about to live with Rory, Charlotte comes back to him and asks him to have dinner with her. She tells him that she regrets not going out with him in the summer and asks him to walk her home. He walked her to her doorstep, but when Charlotte invited him inside, he couldn't go through with it. Realizing he is very in love with Mary, Tim leaves Charlotte's place after telling her he has something important. Tim runs to their home and wakes up Mary, whom he proposes to. Mary accepts and he takes her to see his parents. Mary sits down with Tim's mom for tea while Tim walks with his dad. Mary bonds well with his mom over their flaws, and James expresses his approval to Tim. Sometime later, Tim meets Kit Kat, who was fired from her job and dumped by her boyfriend Jimmy, the last time he saw her. She tells him that she had moved back because things didn't work out for her in London and runs downstairs to meet Mary, whom she jumps on and kisses. At dinner, Tim announces that they are getting married and that Mary is pregnant. The whole family rejoices and the two couples have a beautiful wedding with Rory as the best man. Tim had to use his gifts at the best man speech to prevent it from being messed up, and James became the perfect choice, who also used his gift and went back in time to express his love and add some kind words to his speech. Tim and Mary have a daughter named Posy and celebrate with the whole family. In the coming months, the couple had to move to a new place and the Lake family was united again to celebrate Posy's first birthday. While they were waiting for Kit Kat, Tim received news that his sister had drunkenly crashed her car after getting into a fight with Jimmy. Tim rushed to the hospital and found his sister's face full of cuts and bruises. Tim asks Jimmy the exact time and goes back in time to save his sister. He brings Kit Kat home and prevents the accident from happening. But Kit Kat was drinking at the birthday party and Tim decided to talk with his sister. After having some conversation with Kit Kat, Tim reveals the family secret to her. He takes her back in time and shows her the truth about her boyfriend, Jimmy, who was a cheater. She punches Jimmy and they travel back to the present. Having averted meeting Jimmy, Tim goes back home to see his wife and Kit Kat moves on with her life. Tim finds out that Posy has never been born and in this timeline, he is now a father of a boy. Tim goes back in time to Josie's birth and speaks with James, who tells him that going back before the birth of a child and changing even the tiniest thing will result in having a different child. Tim accepts that he can't solve his sister's problem without affecting his family's life and lets the accident happen. Tim spends the night with Mary at the hospital looking after Kit Kat, promising to find some way that ensures something like this will never happen again. On the next day, after seeing the affection Tim and Mary, who didn't leave her side, have for her, Kit Kat promises to leave Jimmy for good and stop drinking. She also decides to stop leaving jobs and find someone new. After some time, Tim and Mary have another child and Kit Kat settled down with Tim's friend Jay and has her child. One night, while helping Mary get ready for dinner, Tim gets a call from home about James being diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Everyone comes home and Tim talks to his father, who tells him that his smoking habits are the cause of the cancer. James tells his son that he got diagnosed as soon as he could, but it was too late and going back in time to undo the smoking would prevent the birth of him and Kit Kat. In the middle of their conversation, Tim notices that James has known about the disease for a while and that he has been traveling back in time to extend his life and spend more time with his family. James gives Tim his final advice, which contains two parts. The first part is to live a normal life day by day like everybody else, and the second part is to live every part again. The first time with all the worry and tensions of life, and the second noticing how sweet the world can be. Tim lives according to the words of wisdom he heard from his father, and inevitably, James dies on the day of the funeral. Tim goes back through time to see James and sits to listen while his father reads his favorite book. After the funeral, Mary tells Tim that she wants to have a third child. Tim is reluctant because it would mean he can't go back in time to visit his father like he used to whenever he missed him, but he agrees and makes her happy. One night, when Mary is pregnant, Tim visits James for a final time and plays table tennis, one of their routine activities. Tim tells James that he can't come back because of the baby. So they decide to do one last thing. They go back in time together and spend their last moment playing with Tim's childhood self while being careful not to change anything. Tim comes back to the present and Mary gives birth to a boy. After spending time with his family, Tim realizes that it is better to live life day by day and decides not to time travel, not even for the day. Now, James lives life like an ordinary person, and the movie ends as he ends a call with his wife, promising to see her later. With that, the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time.